Our first talk is from Aaron A. Reed on Klingons, Hobbits, and the Oregon Trail. I'm very excited. Aaron is a writer and game designer focused on helping game makers and players tell stories together. He's a multi-time IndieCade and IGF finalist and has spoken about digital storytelling at venues from GamerX to GDC. Welcome, Aaron. You get to be our first speaker of Roguelike Celebration 2023. I know what year it is.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see if you can remember that. Are you hearing me okay? Everything going good? I assume you will pop back on and stop me if not. Yeah, great to be here. It's so awesome to be kicking off Roguelike Celebration 2023 with you all. So I'm Aaron A. Reed. I'm a writer and game designer. Here are some projects over the years you might know me from. My background is in writing interactive fiction, but I've done a decent amount of systems-y stuff too, and I've kind of bounced back and forth between amateur and commercial and academic spaces over the last 15 years. I've done a number of indie digital games. I've done some tabletop role-playing games. I've written books about games and games about books, and books that are produced by game-like procedures but are not actually games themselves, and lots of other stuff in between. And if you're interested, I actually gave an overview of some of my past work at the 2020 Roguelike Celebration, which you can find by this name on YouTube. But more recently, you might know me from this book, which came out earlier this year and is a look back at the first half century of games without graphics. Everything from text adventures to idle games to hypertext and lots of other stuff. Interestingly, I don't actually talk much about roguelikes in this book because I think that's probably a whole different book for someone else to write. And in this one, I'm mostly looking at games where text means kind of specifically interactive prose. But there are a few exceptions. And what does come up a lot in the book that's probably of interest to roguelike-y folks is procedural generation, and specifically all the ways it's been used over the years to build surprising emergent worlds to explore. We often think of that arising as a need for replayability, right? For every run to be a little different. But in the earliest days of computers, it was actually kind of more of a necessity. You simply couldn't fit a pre-made world big enough to be interesting to explore into the footprint of some of the earliest computers. You had to generate a world to have a game at all. But we'll get to that. If we flash back to the talk title, and it's fine, I'd already forgotten it too, you'll recall that I promised to talk about the first decade of text games. And by that I mean the 1970s for somewhat pedantic reasons, but in fact people were mucking around with interactive text even back in the 60s, and actually even earlier than that. So here's the output of a program written in 1952 to author procedurally generated love letters for a machine that was so new at the time it was just called the computer, or specifically the Manchester University computer, which is what MUC in the lower right stands for. So the way this program worked was to take random words from lists of flowery nouns and adjectives and fill in one of several kinds of template sentences. And this was impressive in 1952, not only because the MUC didn't have a keyboard you could type words into, which made creating that list of flowery adjectives a bit of a challenge, but also because the idea of wasting the time of $1 million plus computer to do something so trivial as pretend to have feelings was fairly scandalous. Christopher Strachey, who wrote this program, apparently would print these procedural love letters out and pin them anonymously to the department message board, much to the consternation of his colleagues. He's kind of an unsung queer folk hero of early computing history, by the way, responsible for all kinds of computer firsts, and I think he should be a lot better known. So at the heart of Strachey's program is basically just this, although this was a lot harder to do in the 50s than today. Random wasn't always a thing you could just call as a function. But basically, what this program is doing, right, is grabbing random words from a list and inserting them into template sentences. And it's easy today to think, well, so what? But it's kind of surprising how little the earliest computer games actually made use of randomness, right? In part because it was maybe challenging to code, but also I think there's a bit of a mentality and culture shift at play here. So if we look at computerized military war games, which were some of the very first games created for computers, they tended to run by plugging a bunch of equations for things like missile trajectories, troop casualty rates, and tank speeds into a system that would just kind of spit out a solution based on the parameters, kind of the current state of the system and the new inputs you were giving it. It was totally deterministic. It's kind of a reflection of that early 20th century ideal that if you just got the math right, you could predict things perfectly, right? This is around the time Asimov's Foundation books are coming out about, you can accurately guess what people are going to be doing thousands of years into the future. The kind of randomness of chaos theory was not really in the zeitgeist yet. And you see this attitude in other early computer games. So there's a whole other branch of business simulation games that were basically like economics war games. And these operated kind of on the same principles. You had all these detailed equations about markets and supply and demand and how advertising budgets affected those. everything with a deterministic outcome. So if you priced your laundry detergent the same way in the same fiscal environment, you'd get predictable results each time. This particular game, by the way, was designed for business executives to play, and they did it by circling options on a worksheet, which is what you're seeing here, which was then turned over to a team of competent women who could actually operate the computer to input their important manly business decisions. So typical. When you started seeing educational computer games appear in the 1960s, they often adopted this same tactic. This idea that what computers were really for was running calculations, and what the user should be doing, even if the user was a sixth grader, was supplying the right variable. So in the game that later became known as Hammurabi, you play a Sumerian king making decisions about how to keep your people fed, and you interact by typing in numbers, and those go into fairly predictable little equations for how many bushels of grain a population of a certain size needs to survive, and so on. And I think kind of the epitome of this flavor of game design is really Lunar Lander, which, if you haven't played it, is basically a fun little game about doing calculus. You're inputting the burn rate of your lander on the right and trying to decelerate quick enough to land at a safe speed, but not so fast that you run out of fuel too early. There's no randomness at all. The whole game is just plugging numbers into these brutal, or beautiful, if you're that kind of person, equations. And games in this mode can certainly be fun, don't get me wrong. And they were fun, if nothing else, for their novelty at the time. But they also feel a little stale. So when people started writing programs that were trying to capture the spark of humanity, they couldn't help but come back to randomness, like Strachey with his love letters, as a cheap way of simulating the delightful unpredictability of living people. So Eliza, famously the first chatbot, wasn't entirely deterministic. There was a lot of randomness in which responses it might pull from its pool of options. And it made it feel more like something was alive inside the computer, that something mysterious and interesting and vibrant was going on. And this brings us to the first game I want to dive into in a bit more depth. It's the game that has managed to trick people for 52 years now into thinking it's possible to make a fun educational game. So, no small feat. You might have played a later remake of the Oregon Trail from the 80s or 90s, but the original version actually ran on a teletype, like this one, which connected to a distant mainframe off at a university somewhere. This game was created by a student teacher trying to interest his junior high kids in a history class. Originally, he was going to make a board game about the Oregon Trail, but some of his roommates had taken a programming class and convinced him they could collaborate to make a computer game instead. But board game ideas, like drawing a random card from a deck to get an event, or rolling a die to see how far you move, definitely influenced the game's design. And it's important to note that the game's opening text includes this word simulates, right? So the advantage of a computer game over a board game is there could still be those math equations behind the scenes, making what happens more interesting and contextual to your play than just drawing random cards from a deck. The kids might actually have to absorb some information about what was being simulated, this historical 2,000-mile overland journey, in order to win. So the basics of Oregon Trail simulation is that you purchase supplies in 5 categories. Your progress is tracked by an integer representing miles traveled along the trail. If it meets or exceeds 2,040, you win. You have opportunities to hunt for more food along the way, or trade at forts to replenish supplies. And there's also a random event each turn, pulling from a pool of about 20 events in the original version. And many of these basically test that you have enough of a certain resource, and if you don't, you die. Although actually never of dysentery in this version of the game. That came over 10 years later in a much later remake of this. So here's the code for one of the game's random events. What's going on here? So if some variable named m is greater than 950, we're going to jump to 2935 and print a message about cold weather. And then we're going to test the c variable, which it turns out is how much cold weather gear you have. If m is less than 950, though, we continue on to line 2665 and print a message about rain instead of frigid cold weather. So m here is tracking the number of miles you've traveled. And what this tiny bit of BASIC is simulating is really the Rocky Mountains. At a certain point on your journey, specifically about 1,000 miles west of Missouri, rain turns to snow. The game doesn't show the user any landmarks or milestones. All you get is this increasing mileage number, but that geography is sort of implicitly there in the different ways this event can be presented. A more interesting version of this is this random event where you might get attacked by riders. And these were actually intended by the creators to be white bandits, not Native Americans, basically because historically settlers were way more likely to get attacked by each other than indigenous peoples. So what's going on here is this really gnarly looking equation that is also operating on miles traveled. And if it's less than a certain amount, we skip this event by jumping past it to line 2500. Otherwise, we move on to the rider attack. So what is this equation doing? Well, I plugged it into Wolfram Alpha so you don't have to. So here we're seeing m in the horizontal axis, again representing miles traveled. And the vertical axis basically means what chance in 10 will we skip the rider event at this mileage. So higher in the graph means more likely to see riders. And what this is basically a cool little encoding of the likelihood of bandits striking on this journey. So it starts off low in Missouri near the big cities, spikes in the Great Plains where there's lots of open space, but a lot less law, starts dropping as you get to the difficult terrain of the Rockies, and then drops to almost zero on the other side of them, where the hardship of the journey has winnowed out most challengers. Pretty neat for one line of basic. What's cool about what's happening here is these events are random, but they're informed by the simulation, right? It's randomness constrained by a plausibility space, making a little universe inside your computer that you can't entirely predict or control, but which feels believable. And I would argue that this is one of the key foundational ideas behind why we're so fascinated by procedural generation and roguelikes and all of this stuff in this space, right? It's that balance of predictable and unpredictable. And it's cool to kind of trace this back to these really early games and see how they started to experiment with that. The next game I want to talk about was basically the original tactical space sim, and it was made by a high school senior who really missed his favorite TV show, tragically canceled. And in this game, you fly a little asterisk starship Enterprise around the galaxy, hunting down little ASCII Klingons, blowing them up, and occasionally docking at star bases to refuel and restock your photon torpedoes. The galaxy is randomly generated each time you play, and I'd argue that this game actually has a ton in common with the genre that Rogue would eventually name 10 years later. You're exploring a procedurally generated area from a top-down perspective, returning to a home base when your supplies get too low, and the fun possibility of getting totally screwed by the RNG when it starts you right next to a Klingon. But an interesting thing about the game's procedurally generated galaxy is it was actually way too big to fit into the memory footprint Mike Mayfield was working in. So the game's galaxy is divided into an 8x8 grid of 64 quadrants, and each quadrant when entered is itself an 8x8 grid of 64 sectors. It's a little hard to see, but this overlay helps a bit. So that's 4,096 possible grid spaces that might contain starships, stars, bases, or Klingons. But the version of BASIC Mayfield was using in 1971 did not have any way to create a data structure with 4,000 entries, and many computers at the time would not have had enough memory to hold them anyway. So how did he make this work? If we look back at the quadrant map on the left, which you can view in the game by using a long-range scanner, you see that each quadrant is represented as a 3-digit number like 118. The game's instructions make a big thing of telling you that as the captain of the Enterprise, you need to learn how to read the secret code, which in this case means that this quadrant contains 1 Klingon, 1 starbase, and 8 stars. See, you could all be Starfleet officers now. But the sneaky thing is, this code was actually the literal entire representation of the quadrant in the game's memory. When you enter a quadrant, it randomly distributes the correct number of stars, bases, and Klingons around it. And the reason this works is that you don't often have cause to re-enter a sector you've already visited. If you do, and there was a Klingon there, it would make sense that they'd moved around while you were gone. And you'd be unlikely to notice that the stars had moved too. It's basically lossy compression for a galactic star map, and it's a pretty elegant solution for a high schooler to have come up with, I think. As a bit of a tangent here, when researching this game, I actually did kind of a deep dive into its source code and the flavor of BASIC it was written in. And it's a little rough. There's no distinction in this version of BASIC between global and local variables. Variables had to be either a single letter or a letter and a number, which did not tend to make it very easy to remember what each one did. And worse, while support for functions had just been added, you could only have 26 of them, and you had to name them FNA, FNB, up to FNZ. Again, not super great for remembering which one does which thing. So Mayfield, it turns out, didn't use functions at all in his Star Trek game. I can't really blame him. So the code is just a cheerful nightmare spaghetti of go-tos in the best classic BASIC tradition. A really funny thing, though, is that Mayfield's high school program later got cleaned up for publication by some serious adult coders, and it turns out they kind of broke it. So here's a bit of Mayfield's code that happens at the end of procedurally generating a galaxy, which works by coming up with 64 of those little 3-digit quadrant codes and positioning them in the grid. Each quadrant has a certain percentage chance of having Klingons, stars, or bases in it. And because of that, it's actually unlikely but possible that no star bases or Klingons will have been generated anywhere in the galaxy by the end of the process. And both of those things would kind of break the game. So what this line 775 is doing is saying that if either of these variables, B9 or K9, counting the total number of bases and Klingons in the galaxy, are still 0 at this point, go back to line 490 and start galaxy generation over from scratch. before reporting the stats of the generated galaxy on line 780. So this is the adults cleaned up version of the code, and they use a different tactic to address this edge case. On their line 790, they're saying if there's at least one starbase, skip over the next line. Otherwise, continue to 800. And on 800, G here is the two-dimensional array of quadrant codes. So what this line is doing is manually overwriting whatever was generated for quadrant 6-3 with this magic number 114, i.e. turn it into a quadrant with one starbase, one Klingon, and 4 stars, thus guaranteeing there is now one starbase in the galaxy. So, this change might have been made because Mayfield's solution seemed problematic to the pros. His version is unbounded, right? It could, in theory, just keep generating bad galaxies over and over again, even though that's really unlikely. And maybe that squicked these folks out. Or maybe they worried, even one do-over of galaxy generation might run too slow on some machines at the time. So their alternate solution here might seem pretty clever. It's just a single line of code instead of rerunning the whole generation routine. But it actually introduces 3 new bugs into the program. So first, they're no longer addressing the case where there are 0 Klingons. And this was a lot less mathematically likely to happen, so maybe it didn't seem worth fixing to them, but it still feels kind of sloppy. Second, they're changing the number of Klingons and starbases in the galaxy after showing those totals to the player on the previous line, so those numbers will be wrong. And the reason they did this is probably to do with line renumbering and the way that worked in BASIC. The blog post I wrote about this gets way more into the weeds about that. But more importantly here is the third thing they did, and they're kind of their worst mistake. They didn't realize a crucial thing. So remember what I said about how there are no local variables in this BASIC, only global ones? Yeah, so it turns out these variables B9 and K9 that have kept a running total of bases and Klingons through galaxy generation are not just local counters for the purpose of showing this message to the user here. Those are actually how the game tracks how many bases and Klingons exist. So this means you might get to a state where there are no Klingons left in the galaxy, but the game won't end because that K9 variable is no longer accurate, because line 800 overwrote the quadrant code without adjusting it. So anyway, I just thought you might all find it reassuring that getting map generation right has been a problem since at least the Nixon administration. And I just find it funny that some professional programmers came in to fix up a high schooler's code and just fucked it all up. The last game I want to talk about is a text adventure from the early 80s. It's this one. Many people of a certain age might remember playing it. And this is an interesting game to talk about at Roguelike Celebration because it's basically a text adventure that thinks it's a roguelike. Although its primary creator, Veronica Megler, had actually only ever played one computer game when she wrote this, and that was the original Colossal Cave Adventure of GitLamp and XYZZY fame. So Megler had gotten hired her senior year of college, where she was learning to be a programmer, to write a game that was supposed to be, quote, the best adventure game ever made. That was literally in the job description. And the pay they were offering was $10 an hour. Go figure. I mean, it was the 80s. It went a little farther then, but still. But Megler needed some cash, so she took this job, and she kind of was a person who loved a challenge, and she really threw herself into this one. And she decided the biggest problem with adventure that she wanted to improve on was that it was totally static. So after she'd solved the puzzles, they no longer held any interest for her because they'd be exactly the same if you played the game again. So she decided her adventure game was going to be different. And the key difference is that all of the characters in her game would basically be playing it themselves, just like the player was, each according to their own little script. So a goblin might have a script to wander around and attack anything it sees. Thorin tends to follow Bilbo around, complain a lot, and every now and then sit down and start singing about gold. Gandalf is coded to wander the map, pick up interesting objects he finds, and then put them down later when he gets bored. And the game has a fixed map, but some connections, especially in areas like the Goblin Tunnels, can change from one playthrough to the next, so your map might not always be accurate if you restart the game. And objects were also dynamic, with properties like weight, size, and fragility, which was, and remains, pretty atypical for a text-adventure style of game. So you might be able to use a sword to bash down a locked door, for example, but then that might break it, so you can't use it to slay the dragon later. But the game, it turns out, actually doesn't care how you killed the dragon, right? So in Adventure, it's actually looking for a specific command, like kill dragon. Here, it's just looking for a state where the dragon is dead. So you might achieve that state by killing the dragon yourself, by convincing another character to follow you to the dragon and killing him for you. A wandering monster might just serendipitously take the dragon out. And apparently in one game of this, someone managed to bludgeon Smaug to death with Gollum's corpse, which would have made an interesting alternative ending for the Peter Jackson Hobbit movies. Just saying. Working with other characters is also a key part of gameplay. So a good example comes if Bilbo gets imprisoned in the Goblin Tunnels. He might find one of his friends also trapped there because they were wandering the map at random and got captured. And one way to escape is to realize the other characters are taller than you and ask one of them to carry you out. But a different solution, if you've mapped the tunnels, is to give your companion a sequence of orders to escape and then come back to set you free. One of the strategy guides for the game notes that there's 3 possible outcomes to this. Either the door will open with your companion waiting outside because it worked, they'll end up back in the dungeon with you because they got recaptured along the way, or you never see them again, because either the map of the tunnels is different on this playthrough of the game, or they just got killed trying to carry out your plan. But all this dynamism made this game extraordinarily difficult to debug. This is some Z80 assembler code from the game. I'm not going to walk you through this because I have no idea what it's doing. You're writing bits directly into memory registers, doing all kinds of low-level stuff. But meanwhile, trying to debug this emergent simulation where characters are interacting with each other on the other side of the map. And pretty much the only way to debug something is to squint really hard at a core memory dump. And so the poor folks who eventually tried to verify this game was bug-free or even winnable just kind of gave up. There's this great message in the manual which says, due to the immense size and complexity of this game, it is impossible to guarantee that it will ever be completely error-free. This is the sound of QA giving up on your game, folks. And in fact, once the game was released, it became kind of infamous for all these weird edge cases and bugs. So if you meet Elrond in Rivendell, for example, he might offer you an elven lunch, which temporarily makes you stronger. It turns out Elrond's weight property wasn't set correctly, so Bilbo can actually pick up Elrond and carry him around, and some strategy guides advise doing this to acquire a continuous supply of stat-buffing elven lunches. It's also possible to meet Bard the Bowman, get him to follow you to Smaug the Dragon, ask him to slay him, and for Bard to say no, just before you both get burned to a crisp. Even when characters were behaving as designed, their actions could be frustrating. Gandalf's behavior code basically kind of makes him seem like a deranged kleptomaniac. He just kind of wanders around the map, stealing things, and then dropping them in inconvenient locations. So another hot strategy tip for the game is to trap him in the Troll's Cave as soon as possible to keep him from making off with some vital quest item. But all this weirdness also lent the game a certain kind of charm, which we here at this conference are all familiar with. That joy of never quite knowing what's going to happen next. And it's interesting that even though this game was a huge bestseller and might have been the best-selling commercial text adventure of all time, depending on which numbers you're looking at, Migler's kind of independently invented roguelike-y ideas weren't really picked up by the adventure game genre, which wanted a lot more control and predictability, right? They saw all of these weird emergent stories that seemed very un-Tolkien, right? Very against the spirit of the original book, as a bug, not a feature, right? But those ideas would kind of resurface in mainstream games decades later. And of course, we're hanging out in roguelikes all along. So to wrap up, I think you can learn a lot by looking at the deep history of the kinds of games you like to play and make, even deeper than you might have thought to look before. And I love how these core ideas and basic techniques have been around and being iterated on for half a century of digital games now and counting. Also, you should probably pay your game designers more than $10 an hour. And don't underestimate those high school hackers, because they probably know more about what's going on than you do. If you're interested in my book, I'm thrilled to announce it has just made it back into print as of today after selling out earlier this year. So you can find out how to get it at this URL or by just searching for the 50 Years of Text Games newsletter. Thank you so much, and have a great roguelike celebration.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Aaron. Everyone wants a pocket Elrond to dispense lunch to them in
Wouldn't that be
chat.
handy just in your daily life?
Yeah,
Little
exactly.
elven lunches whenever you need one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very desirable. Also, I just want to mention that everyone really loved your slides and your highlighting. Much
Thank you.
appreciation. Excellent. Okay, people in chat, we have some time. Please ask questions or upvote questions. Right now, the only questions are things like, Alexi, do a Game Boy impression, and I will not. We have more interesting things to talk about. I guess one thing I'll just kick off with is that it is amazing to have the gameplay be so open-ended in that period. Like, do you feel like there is much else in terms of comparison at the time, or have you found like at the time where people were their minds as blown as ours are now, or were they like, yeah, computers can kind of do whatever, we don't really understand it, so it might as well do this?
Yeah, I think it was really kind of like a moment where, the sky really felt like the limit as far as like what you could do with a computer game. And for a lot of people, the natural tendency was to make things like more and more simulationist, right? I think, we saw early on, that was what people thought of computers as being good at doing, was simulating things. So clearly, a game is going to be better if you're simulating more and more of the world. And it's kind of interesting that I think adventure games really moved in a direction that kind of ultimately ended up rejecting that, right? So you did see text adventures are basically simulationists in a lot of ways because you're moving around a space and you've got objects and all that stuff. But over time, you kind of saw a lot of those features be pulled back, right? Because I think the design idea is that these games are really about a story, and the designer has a specific story they want to tell. And if I'm trying to tell a story about the nobility of elves, being able to pick up Elrond and carrying him around kind of breaks your immersion into that story,
bit.
right?
Yeah.
But then, as I mentioned, other game genres were like, oh no, actually that's really interesting, right? And maybe that's not the story the designer wanted to tell, but you have made a weird little story of your own that nobody else got, and that's kind of awesome. So it's an interesting kind of bifurcation moment to me, where I think The Hobbit is sort of like a look into an alternate universe at where text adventures were actually much more like roguelikes that we didn't really get, and instead they moved in a different direction. So yeah, it's kind of a neat. And you're right, it is very early, like 82. It was written in 81, right? So this was like right after Rogue, so there wasn't a lot of kind of prior art at that level of simulationist detail. So yeah, it's a really interesting game.
Yeah, which is interesting, that element of like people didn't have preconceived ideas of how it was supposed to work, so they could kind of just try something. That leads nicely, I think, actually into a question from Gala Larsel of like, do you have thoughts on what the future of text games looks like? We've been talking about the past.
Yeah. So it was really interesting to me writing the book how often when you looked back on people predicting what the future of the genre would be, they're just like always wrong. Like no matter what, they're always wrong.
And now it's your chance to be wrong.
Now's my chance to be wrong. No, so I sort of in the moment we're at now, right? Like there's this big, all of this new generative text AI stuff. The last two chapters of the book actually contrast AI Dungeon with a like very handcrafted game where every string is individually carefully written for the case it's in, and look at those two as kind of this, maybe a fork in the path, right? Like which of these directions are we going to go in? I think the answer is usually we'll go in both of them, right? Like different people will take both of those paths. And I think it's just really too early to predict what the long-term repercussions of, that new technology are going to be. But I think it's kind of neat too to see how every time there's a new piece of hardware or a new platform invented, no matter how inappropriate it might seem at first glance for reading text on, people will try to write prose for it, right? So like famously Lifeline from 2015 was made for the Apple Watch, and it's a game about texting a fictional astronaut who's stranded and needs your help. And you would not think the watch screen would be a great place to read text, but they were like, actually, people are reading text messages on it all the time. Like, it's actually fine for that. So I think, people are always, people have been writing for thousands of years. We've had computers for 50 plus. And at this point, I think people are always going to be interested in trying to find new ways of telling stories on each new medium and platform that comes around. So it'll be really cool to see what happens with that in the next 50 years.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And that is the unpredictability of you don't know what new kind of technology is going to get in there and kind of push things in new directions. Question from work, it's got a lot of upvotes. It's just, do you have any interesting kind of personal stories from playing Oregon Trail or The Hobbit yourself?
Yeah. So I think one of my good ones is I had gotten when I was a kid the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy text adventure game.
Yes.
And I think I got it because the guy at the software store, I told him I liked Space Quest and wanted more games like that, and so he recommended Hitchhikers to me. And I didn't know anything about the books or anything. It was totally baffling to me because of like I was probably too young. It had a lot of like Britishisms in it that I just didn't get as an American kid.
Didn't know what an analgesic was when I started.
Yeah. Yep. It's also kind of famously a fairly obtuse game. So I originally read the book of The Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy to try to get hints for the game, which did not work very well because they're fairly different. But yeah, that was sort of a weird experience, and it ended up becoming like a favorite book of mine, But
Nice.
yeah, it's always funny how like personal everyone's interactions is with particular medias like that. Like everyone kind of has their own pathway to discovering stuff, which is delightful.
Yeah, I'll briefly savor that one, like, because my mom played those text adventure games and kind of passed that on to me, and she found the helpline for Hitchhiker's Guide, which was the thing at the time, and the helpline told her if you looked under the bed, and she was like, oh, no, I didn't, thank you, and then he's like, wait, there's nothing under the bed, you can't do that in the game. that's the kind of thing you need to do, which is a great answer. And then she was also like, thanks for nothing. But,
Meta help.
Yes. Another question from the chat from XOXO Monster Girl. Do you have any idea how much physical paper a game of Oregon Trail took up on one of those printers?
That's a really interesting question. So when it originally debuted, there was just the one teletype, right? That was the one access to a computer in the whole school. So apparently the way he did it is he would have kids get into groups of like 4 to 6, and they would run through it together with like one person sitting at the keyboard and other people kind of like, shouting ideas. Apparently one person was usually designated to like keep track of the supplies on a piece of paper and things like that. There's some cool stuff that they actually did with the physical hardware of that. So the teletype had a bell on it, like how a typewriter, when you get to the end of the line, will ring a bell, but you could programmatically ring the bell. So for certain things where like if you like made a good shot in the hunting game, it would like ring the bell. And I can just kind of imagine all these kids being like, yeah, we got him, So yeah, a lot of that, yeah, I don't know. It would have been, probably one playthrough of that game, I would imagine, works out to like maybe 10 or 15 like typed pages. So yeah, a decent amount of paper probably gone through as the class was playing. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. Here's another question. I think this is really interesting from Josh G. You talked about the early games being extremely varied. Do you feel like there was a moment in game history when genre became a thing? Kind of like calcified it down.
Yeah, calcified is a good way to say it, because yeah, a lot of these, like the first half of the 1980s, there's just so many weird computer games, right? And it's funny to look at them today because so many of them don't really fit into the nice little boxes we have made around genre today, right? Like they're kind of in multiple categories. They're trying to do weird experimental things. I think it was kind of around that time, the middle of the 80s, 85, 87, that you really kind of started to see things get a little more locked down. And a lot of that was just kind of business and marketing, right? Like people had figured out that people will pay X amount of money for Y kind of game, so we need to make 20 Y kinds of games, right? For the Christmas season this year, right? And this obviously doesn't mean that was the end of the experimental period, but it is really interesting, I think, looking back on games from that time, because it was just kind of the Wild West. People were trying all kinds of weird things to see what would stick. Yeah, it's there's so many fascinating like abandoned like threads and weird little experiments from that time. So it's super worth like firing up an emulator and playing through some of those games at some point.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's a nice note to end on, of the call to like go play these games. I know I want to play The Hobbit really badly now because I want my pocket lunch Elrond. I want Bard to just tell me, like,
not feeling it today. Sorry.
Yeah, like, sorry. No. Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Aaron. This was fantastic. Wonderful way to start the conference.